Now you were talking about the poles, the polar poles, and their icy layers,
Right.
and everybody's talking about how they're all starting to disappear and all that. Is now back when our crystal was around the Earth, those weren't there then. Is that what you're trying to
Correct.
say? Okay.
Right. I believe what the Bible says the fountains of the deep broke open at the beginning of the flood, probably launched rocks up and shattered the canopy. That crystal canopy being made of super cold ice would be magnetic. Just Google magnetic ice. If you get ice down to 400 below zero, it becomes magnetic. So the ice
Which
that
could
you saw,
easily do in outer space.
sure. Outer space is that minus 459.5, whatever it is, absolute zero,
That's
minus
what I'm saying. So
273 Celsius or 0 Kelvin. Who cares? Okay. It's interesting. The Earth has a north pole that we spin around. It also has a magnetic north pole where the compass points. And that magnetic north pole is moving all the time, but it basically in Canada. I think it's migrating more toward the real North Pole now. But even just 50 years ago, the magnetic North Pole was in Canada. And you had to adjust your compass for called the angle of declination, because your compass is pointing magnetic north, not true north. And so you can Google that angle of declination. Okay.
yeah.
So it's interesting. The effects of the ice age are centered around the magnetic North Pole. The ice came clear down to Kansas City, Missouri, but in Russia it didn't go as far down. Why? Because the ice got dumped on the North and South Pole probably rapidly, probably snowed 10 feet a minute during the beginning of this. The ice age happened at the beginning of the flood. That's why they find animals frozen standing up. Have you ever been in snow so deep you couldn't even fall down? You can't fall over.
Yes.
Okay. I think that happened. The mammoths are found frozen standing up with food still in their mouth, and the food in their stomach is not digested. After you die, your stomach acid keeps working. It don't know you're dead. How do you get frozen mammoths? That's a hairy elephant standing up with food still in their mouth. You bury them, and they're suffocated. There's no water in their lungs. They died of suffocation. That would be they died in a big snowdrift. I think the snow got so deep so fast it started pushing out toward the equator like an avalanche or a landslide. And that's why we find glacial grooves all over places up there. When you study earth science, you see the effects. A glacier, when glaciers push out, they plow ahead of them a pile of rocks. When they melt back, they leave the rocks behind. It's called a terminal, which means the end, a terminal moraine. A moraine's a big hill, a range of rocks, okay? They're all over Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Minnesota. Terminal moraines, lateral moraines. Those all formed at the time of the flood. So the ice caps were huge. And more North and South Pole. Of course, after you get off Antarctica, you're into the ocean, so it's hard to find the effects of it in the bottom of the ocean. But it's easier to find the effects in Missouri, okay? The ice caps were huge.
Thank you.
So Noah was in the ark for about a year, and the whole world's covered in water, some of it frozen, some of it liquid. It would take 500 years, 400 years for that ice to melt back to where it is today. So when Noah gets off the ark, this is going to sound strange, the ice caps were still huge, which means the oceans were smaller because the water's frozen stuck at the North Pole. That makes the continents bigger. If you look at any map, just Google continental shelf. All of the continents have a shelf. Like in Pensacola, you have to go out 100 miles before it gets 100 feet deep.
Yeah.
That was the beach out there. If you lowered the oceans average 12,000 feet right now. If you took 200 feet of water out of the oceans and froze it and stick it on the North and South Pole, enlarge the ice caps, that makes the oceans smaller, and that makes everything connected. You could walk to Australia. Between Australia and Vietnam, all Indonesia, the archipelago in here, that water is generally 30 or 40 feet deep, compared to that wall over there.
Yeah.
If you lowered the oceans 200 feet, you could walk anywhere in the world. England has got a channel between it and France, the English Channel.
Yes.
It's 30 miles wide, but it's only about 100 feet deep. If you lowered the oceans 200 feet, England would be part of France, making the British very upset.
But well fed.
Yeah. So I think that the ice age happened at the beginning of the flood, lasted for a few hundred years afterwards. So animals had time for several hundred years when they got off the ark to migrate anywhere they wanted. So atheists said, how did the kangaroos get to Australia? Well, they hopped. That's how they get everywhere. You could hop right down there. Then as the ice melts back, the water's coming up, and all of a sudden they're trapped on an island, what used to be a peninsula.
Right.
So in the 6,000 year history that is the Earth, when did that ice age happen?
Right at the beginning of the flood.
Okay, so and when was
4,500 years ago in Noah's
4,500 years ago? Okay.
All right. So, and now we've got someone asking again. Scientists say that the lake drained 8,000 years ago. When did it happen, in your opinion?
As far as talk about the Missoula flood, I think after the flood was over, the Bible says in Psalm 104, the mountains lifted up. The mountains arose and the valleys sank down. If you covered the earth in water, and then you had a chunk, the earth was all busted up like an eggshell. It still is today, busted up. We have fault lines everywhere. The San Andreas fault, the Hayward fault. None of them are my fault, but okay, we've got lots of faults. Some of them are still moving, and we have earthquakes and volcanoes along the fault lines. Well, if you had a chunk of earth the size of Texas, let's say, it's covered in water. All of a sudden, one side sinks down, one side lifts up. The water's going to rush off. How fast it tilts is going to determine how fast the water rushes off. And pockets of water are going to be trapped all over the place. Natural depressions, be a natural lake. And some of them are still here. Some of them got too full, went over the top at the lowest place and carved a valley. And now the lake's gone because you have a way for the water to get out. This all would have happened in the first few hundred years after the flood. It's interesting to look at the globe and see nearly all the mountain ranges in the world follow the coastline. The Rocky Mountains follow the North Pacific. I wonder why. The Appalachian Mountains follow the North Atlantic. The Andes Mountains in South America follow the South Pacific. Even the Alps in Europe, they follow the Mediterranean generally. I think that was a small area that caved in. Water rushed in, filled in the Mediterranean, and left the Alps behind sticking up. So I think all this would have happened during the flood and several hundred years after that. We still have lakes that are getting too full and overflowing. I'd like to see, Joseph, can you find the documentation? Somebody told me the Spanish sailed down the California coast in the 1700s and could not find an opening to get in. It was rugged mountains all the way down. Now we have the San Francisco Bay. Okay. If you closed up where San Francisco Bay is, that might be a good idea for several reasons. But there's a mountain range in Northern California and a mountain range in Southern California. I lived in Fairfield for 3 years. If you closed up the gap between them, a huge lake would fill up in Central California, giant lake. That lake got too full at some point. I've been saying in my tour, and I've been saying maybe 100 years after the flood. It might have been as recently as 300 years ago. But anyway, the lake got too full, went over the top. Once the erosion starts, get out of the way. So the Missoula flood is probably from a giant lake left over from Noah's flood that washed. Could have happened 100 years after the flood or 500 years after the flood. If they're telling you this lake drained 8,000 years ago or something, how on earth can you possibly know that? How could you possibly know such a thing? Well, we date the layer. No, that goes back to the carbon dating and the stupid geologic column. No.
I was going to say, and then we go back to all the other theological and all right. So now does this help also explain like the Great Salt Lake and the Dead Sea and things like that? Because basically obviously I'm not very smart, but I've heard theories that like the Dead Sea was just a concentration of the seas, and that's why it's so salty, and it's a concentration of the sea waters. Same thing with the Great Salt Lake. Is there any logic to that at all, or no?
Oh, absolutely. The ground contains all kinds of different mineral salts.
Yes.
Magnesium chloride and all kinds of different salts. Okay, sodium chloride. When it rains, some of that mineral salt gets into the water and runs off into the ocean eventually. Today, the oceans are 3.6% salt. They could have gone from fresh water to 3.6% salt in less than 5,000 years because the water runs in and evaporation takes out only the water, leaves the salt behind. It's a big distillery, okay?
Okay.
Why is the ocean so salty? I believe during Noah's flood, the whole world was fresh water. And when Noah got off the ark, everything is fresh water, but the mineral salts washing off the ground have slowly contaminated the ocean and got it saltier very gradually. And some animals have had to adapt to salt water. We now have saltwater crocodiles and freshwater crocodiles. And they probably had a common ancestor called a crocodile. Doesn't prove they're related to bananas.
Say, let me guess.
Yeah. So today, now the Great Salt Lake and in Utah and Dead Sea in Israel, they don't have an outlet. The water runs in, evaporates, and is constantly building up salt with no way